Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and once again it's time for a breakfast with Blaha. And yes, I'm having chicken, rice, and vegetables. 22 pounds into my cup, by the way. And now that my facetious Athlean X-type title is out of the way, let's talk about why this is killing your gains. Now I want to state up front, I don't like block periodization. I prefer conjugate type training. I prefer concurrent periodization. I have lots of reasons for this. I'm not saying that people can't make gains doing block periodization. I'm not saying that people can't go to the world level and break world records doing it, because they have. What I'm saying is it probably just takes more drugs to use it to get there. This is where I'm going with this. I'm not saying it can't be done, but you may need to up the dose, bro. And we need to look no further than one of the biggest proponents on YouTube of this, Dr. Mike Israetel at Renaissance Periodization. He pointed out that he sees tons of lifters who, during a hypertrophy block, because he programs this way, during a hypertrophy block, they gain more strength than on a strength block. Think about that for a moment. He oftentimes sees lifters, power lifters, gain more strength from a hypertrophy phase or a hypertrophy block than they do from a strength block. Why? Because hypertrophy causes most of our strength. Now, when you say that, you're going to have people say, but this person over here isn't that big and they're really strong. Okay, they had to gain muscle to get stronger. And irrespective of what your genetics and your leverage is and your muscle fiber distribution is, for you as an individual, because we can't change those things. We can't train for better genetics or leverages or skeletal structure, right? We can't train for those things. So for the individual themselves, 90% of your strength gains on a 1 rep max will come from hypertrophy. The other factors, perfect technique, intramuscular coordination, neuromuscular efficiency, all this other stuff counts for about 10%. And I'm not saying it doesn't matter, because that 10% matters. I mean, again, 10% is turning a 500 squat into a 550 squat. That's relevant. I'm not implying that it's not, so let's make that clear. But what I am saying is that the hypertrophy is more important. In other words, you hypertrophy your weakest link on a lift, your max will go up every single time. In other words, you need to be training for hypertrophy year-round. Now, how do people get around this using these strength blocks? How do you think they get around it? How do you think all this Russian programming that was written for Russians, and I mean, again, Russian lifters and drugs, long history here, and I'm not saying other countries don't too, but Russians are very well known for it openly for using large amounts of anabolics. And they have a long history of getting caught doing so. I'm not saying other lifters don't use just as much, but this isn't a stretch here. All this type of programming was written for people on drugs. That's where all your linear block periodization comes from. So what do? They run a hypertrophy block, they maximize hypertrophy, and they run a certain amount of stuff. And then when they go to a strength block, they up the dose. Then they're good, there's no problem. Because they're gaining less muscle during some of the strength blocks. Particularly they drop down to say like a 3x3, and you're not doing large volumes of supplemental work. They may lose a small amount of muscle during that phase, right? Let's say they run a 3-week block like that. The third week they might lose a little bit of muscle, especially if they've been using higher volumes and reps to build it. But if they up the dose, they keep gaining muscle. So they're over here gaining muscle in hypertrophy, and they go into a 5-rep block. Up the dose. They go into a 3-rep block. They're still using that higher dose. What happens? It causes them to grow. They're not missing anything. Now they're just peaking and gaining all these other factors. Problem solved. How does someone who's a casual user who doesn't ever up their dose, how do they fix this? They don't. How does someone who's completely drug-free use this? They don't. You're going to lose potential gains at certain points in your strength blocks during your peaking. Potentially going to lose a little bit of muscle. And at the very best, you're going to gain a lot less than you gained during the hypertrophy phase. You're going to gain less. So if you're spending half your year doing blocks of training that are not gaining as much hypertrophy, it's killing your gains and it's killing your overall strength potential. And then people would say, well, when you mix them, you can't maximize hypertrophy. You can maximize hypertrophy. And even if you can't, you can get real close. Like, well, you guys doing your conjugate stuff, you do maxes every week. So that affects your ability to get more training volume. Well, it might affect your ability to get excessive volume. You can still do 10 to 20 sets of hypertrophy work every week per muscle group, which is your sweet spot. That is usually your optimal zone for hypertrophy. If anyone can gain muscle going beyond that is actually a point of debate. The scientific literature is not in agreement that that's the case. Yes, there are some studies, but there are a lot of studies that debunk that. And we can question very heavily the quality of those studies that show more, and it has been questioned and it has been debated. There are good experts out there who feel that they don't actually prove that. That aside, you can max out every week and still do 15 sets per body part of hypertrophy work. My lifters do it, I do it. I put up examples. There are guys like Mikey who does it. He does it in his vlogs. He's drug-free, by the way. He does it. What do you mean you can't do it? Oh, maybe you won't recover from 30 sets per body part per week if you're maxing every week. Okay, but why are you trying to do 30? The literature doesn't even support that you're going to gain more muscle from going that high. Most of the literature would suggest you're going to gain less muscle if you do that. You can still optimize hypertrophy. And even if you couldn't, let's assume that you could only gain 95% of your possible hypertrophy because you're using recovery on the maxes and the speed work every week, which is perfectly safe, by the way, perfectly safe, done in conjugate style. Let's say you're only gaining 95% of the hypertrophy you could have gained, but you're doing it year round versus other blocks where maybe you're gaining 100% of your potential hypertrophy half of the year and then 50% of your potential the other half. Which one's going to put more muscle on you over the course of a year? One that has you gaining 90 or 95% of your muscle every single week. While still training for maximum strength with maxes. And let's come over to maxes. What's going to make you better at maxing out? Doing heavy fives, doing heavy threes, or doing 1-rep max lifts. 1-rep max lifts. They get you stronger in terms of the actual strength. The only reason people use the other stuff is to have some volume to get some hypertrophic response. Okay? It's because they're doing it for the whole phase. And if they just dropped to maxes, they would lose muscle. But maxes improve strength better than threes do, as far as actual maximum strength. And we measure strength with a 1-rep max. So realistically, this idea of block training, you're going to gain less out of it unless you are upping the dose, bro, through different parts of it, right? And that's a solution that'll fix it. That will fix the problem. But not everybody wants to up the dose, bro. And some of us would like to make gains year-round, and some of us would like to stay really strong year-round. There are perks to that. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.